All right, we're setting up now. Hooray! We're going to talk about the Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders Democratic nomination and the race and the differences between them, and we're going to learn so much together today. All right, don't wait for it to fill up for a second. I don't know. Check my imaginary watch. It's not there. Okay, anyway. So I've read some interesting articles recently about the differences between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. Yes, Christina, my hair is all gone. You've welcome to the thing. So I want to talk why I'm supporting Bernie Sanders. Talk about why I'm supporting Bernie Sanders as a presidential nominee. But I also want to talk about some of the fundamental differences between Hillary and Bernie. And first of all, I would like to explain that their senatorial voting record when they were serving together was 93% the same. They voted with each other most of the time. So a lot of their viewpoints aren't adversarial. That's what's so interesting about the Hillary versus Bernie thing, is that when it comes to a senatorial standpoint, when we compare Bernie Sanders to Hillary Clinton, and when you look at what they did in office together and how they voted, their records were strikingly similar. Now, why is it now that it's going on about 8 years later that Bernie and Hillary are now so disparate in their views and what's going on? Well, I want to break down some of the arguments that we're seeing against Bernie Sanders and some of the rhetoric so we can understand what it is that Bernie Sanders really does represent. So he is a self-identified socialist, meaning he has some ideas that are firmly rooted in socialism that many Americans think are antithetical to the idea of what it means to be American and this self-exceptionalism that Americans so identify with so often. Because Americans love to identify as, the inconvenienced millionaires. We're going to all be millionaires someday, and right now we're just working our way up. And that idea and that notion that we all eventually make it to the top is something that I think is hindered many of us and has actually crippled the American political cycle because we don't really make decisions that are in our own self-interest. We make ideological decisions rather than pragmatic and rational decisions. That's why things like global single-payer universal health care have been so hard to come by in the United States, yet around the rest of the world, these things are ideas that are just fully accepted. The idea that single-payer healthcare is a socialist idea is something that is a narrative that has largely been pushed by lobbyists from the healthcare sector who want you to believe that it's a bad thing. They can manipulate the national conversation by creating television and YouTube ads that say we're going to be subject to death panels due to the single-payer healthcare system. That's something that's not true, but they can make it sound true. And if they can do that, they can lean a conversation one way, which is unfortunately how it's kind of happened. Now, Bernie Sanders is talking about primarily how wealthy the wealthy are compared to the rest of us. And what's happening is he's being nailed as a socialist. They're saying, this is wealth redistribution. This is socialism. This is horrible. This is against everything America's all about. This is against all of our freedoms. To which I would reply that it really, okay, if you really want to break it down, anytime we decide to create different tax structures, what we're inherently doing is redistributing wealth. Okay? Wealth as an idea is currently being redistributed from the very poor and the middle class towards the wealthy. So that is wealth distribution as it happens and is the status quo right now. So is it a bad idea necessarily to redistribute some of the wealth from the wealthiest people in America back into the middle class? Personally, I think this is actually a great idea. But remember, his opponents are saying that this is horrible. Historically speaking, the ideas that Bernie Sanders are positing aren't actually crazy. They've been done before, most notably, and I talked about this the other day, under President Eisenhower. President Eisenhower, under his presidency, the wealthiest 1% of Americans were taxed at about 87% of their income. So if you made $1 million, $870,000 would be taken away from you. Now, many wealthy Americans find huge problems in this. They think that what is their hard-earned right is being taken away from them. Personally, I don't see things that way. Because genuinely, if you can't live off of $130,000 a year after taxes, you're doing something weird. I have maintained a very comfortable lifestyle doing what I do, and I don't need more than what I have. I think that there's this idea the excess is something that we all believe we're going to have one day, but it actually rarely ever comes to fruition. And the problem with that self-realization is that it doesn't self-realize. We have many mechanisms in the United States within our own tax code and how things work that prevent us from becoming millionaires. Being a millionaire is extremely rare. Most of you aren't smart enough, don't have the talent or the athletic ability necessary to do that. And so it's not going to happen for you. So what we really need to do is move more towards a culture where we have a healthy middle class where it's a-okay to make $70,000 or $80,000 a year and support a family on that. I think that's a realistic goal, and I think it's a goal that we should all share. I read this story recently about a diner. I want to say it was in Maine, maybe. It's a diner in Maine where the owner of the diner said, you know what? I'm not going to pay my employees, in tips anymore. I'm going to give everybody $15 an hour. And here's what happened. The customer service actually improved. The customer experience improved. Because when people aren't stressed about making enough money and paying their bills and worried about whether or not if they get sick, they're going to be okay, they're more productive workers. What Bernie Sanders is saying is he's saying, let's redistribute the wealth. All right. But is that a bad idea? Is it a bad thing to have a healthier, stronger middle class? Hillary Clinton is running on some foundational democratic ideas that are liberal-leaning, and it should come as no surprise that people who are a little bit further to the left than Hillary Clinton are very much attaching themselves to Bernie Sanders. But why should Bernie Sanders matter to you? Possibly, most likely, a younger person. Let's say you're probably under the age of 30 if you're watching this. Maybe 35. Fuck it, maybe you're under the age of 40. Why should you care about Bernie Sanders and his policies? Because his policies are going to help us change the things we need to change. Bernie Sanders has historically been anti-war and anti-defense spending, okay? This year, okay, in terms of revenue, what defense gets versus what education gets, and these are rough ballpark numbers, so you can correct me for being wrong, but basically the Department of Defense is going to get about $720 billion, this fiscal year in order to fund themselves, compared to the Department of Education, which is going to get about $45 billion. And so when you see a problem in our country, when we are spending literally 16 times the amount of money on defense that we do on education, so we have huge defense contracts that don't go away. And Bernie Sanders is the type of person that says, we don't need to spend that much on defense because it's not our job to be the police of the world. Of course, we should maintain our sovereignty and we should maintain our military. And we, of course, need a military in the event we need to use it. But we don't need the size of the military. The size and scope of what we have is just too large. It's excessive. I tell this funny story to people, right? Who operates more planes than anyone else in the world? Military planes. Who operates more planes? Answer number one, the U.S. Air Force operates more planes than anyone else in the entire world, right? Who operates the second most amount of planes? Anybody in the entire world. Who operates the second most amount of airplanes? The answer is the United States Navy. Who operates the third most amount of planes in the entire world? The answer for number three is the U.S. Army, actually. Who operates the fourth most amount of planes of anybody in the entire world? The Coast Guard, the U.S. Coast Guard. And fifth, we finally get Russia. So our four branches of defense all operate more planes individually than the next best country, Russia, which should tell you that we have over-militarized. And when you over-militarize, as President Dwight D. Eisenhower warned about in his closing address when he talked about the military-industrial congressional complex, when you over-militarize, military becomes its own industry. And this is something that Bernie Sanders has talked about. We have an industry in the United States that we need to curb. If we could cut our defense spending in half, that would be a big deal. In fact, I tell you this little cool parable. There's this program. It's called the F-35 A Joint Strike Tactical Fighter, I think that's what it's called. It's called the F-35 Fighter Program. And it has been mired in cost overruns and just excesses. And after this has all been said and done, the F-35 has been kind of a joke. It's a horrible program. Now, I'm going to give you an idea of what that F-35 fighter program is worth. Now, remember, the F-35 is supposed to be a fighter airplane. It's supposed to go and shoot other airplanes out of the sky. Who, I don't really know, because there's not really that many other countries that maintain a fighter fleet like that. And we already had the F-22 Raptor. Yes, it's technically a different purpose, but, when we actually look at how these flights are being done. They're done by drones, and we don't really need pilots anymore anyway, probably. So we've kind of spent a ton of money into this whole. Now, what's the F-35 fighter program worth, okay? Well, if you were to get rid of the F-35 fighter program, which conservatively I think last time I checked was, let me actually Google this really quick, F-35 fighter cost. Here we go. All right. A single F-35A fighter costs a whopping $148 million. $1.5 trillion over the life cycle. $1.5 trillion. So let's talk about the $1.5 trillion over the 55-year life cycle. Let's break that down to make sure I have the numbers right, because I did this the other day and it was interesting. I have a little doc that I brought up. All right, here we go. Okay, so here we go. This is something I want to share with you. Let's say we cut those fighter airplane costs in half. Just for instance, just to say we could, for the F-35 fighter. Over this 55-year life cycle of the F-35 fighter, okay, we could give every single public school teacher in America, from elementary to college, okay, public schools, not private schools, we can't even count those in because we don't know all their funding. We could give every single public school teacher in America, every single one, a $45,000 annual raise, every single one for 55 years. That would cover the entirety of their career plus retirement plus some. That's just one airplane. That's how much money we spend on defense. And I guarantee you this. If the median pay for a teacher right now is somewhere between $40,000 and $50,000 a year, and we gave them all an additional $45,000 a year, teachers would be paid about $95,000 a year. And I would tend to argue that teaching and education is one of the most important roles we have in society, right? I mean, you're educating students, young minds. People are going to grow up and be the next generation of the world. You know, my parents were both educators at one point in time. My dad was a college professor, so I believe in education. And I believe that Bernie Sanders believes in education. So what I believe is this. We need better educators. And the only way to attract better educators is to pay them more money. Because I would love to go teach more than anything in the whole world. I think it would be great to get in front of a classroom full of kids and teach them about science and teach them about math, teach them about history, politics, whatever it is, get them passionate. You know, the things that I'm sitting here on Periscope doing, I would love to be able to go teach. But unfortunately, I can't be remunerated enough to make it worth my time because I don't want to be paid $50,000 a year. I don't want to lose 66% of my income that I currently make to go and educate people. It's not a proposition that I would easily accept. I would not want to go be a teacher purely because it's not a great way to exist in the world. I couldn't have the things that I want. It's hard to have a nice car if you're a teacher. It's hard to live in a house that you enjoy if you're a teacher. We don't pay them enough, and we know that. But the reason we don't pay teachers enough isn't because we don't have enough money. It isn't because we aren't taxing people enough. It's because we do have the money and we spend it in the wrong places. You know, I do believe that we can change what we do, and that's why I like Bernie Sanders so much. Once again, one of his platforms is increasing education spending and decreasing defense spending. And people in on both party lines, whether it be Republicans and Democrats, his opponents have said, but won't that make the nation less secure? I beg to differ, okay? And here's why. My generation, you know, when I was in high school is when the first war in Afghanistan started. And it was my peers who were sent to Iraq and Afghanistan to fight those wars. It's a lot easier to make decisions about sending people to war and killing U.S. citizens when you aren't the one who has to go do the fighting. And what I've seen in the United States foreign policy is that I believe we create more problems than we solve. And what I actually think we're doing in most of our foreign policy, to me, seems to be geared towards controlling places that have oil deposits, not necessarily about spreading freedom and democracy. I don't think those ideas are any way relevant at all. If we had some honesty about our global policy and our foreign policy, and we just said, yeah, we want to go build military bases overseas just because we can, and we want to control the places where we're getting foreign oil, well, I think that would beg some harder questions, like, well, why are we so dependent on foreign oil? But they don't say those things. Once again, Bernie Sanders, he's a guy that wants us to be less dependent on foreign oil. I don't think that's a crazy idea. I think that our national economy shouldn't rest upon what's happening 15 to 20,000 miles away. What's my opinion on the whole American sniper controversy? I don't know that there was an American sniper controversy. Here's what I think happens when we go overseas and fight wars, okay? When we go overseas and fight wars, we end up with a lot of casualties to citizens of those countries that never should have died. And here's what happens. We fly drones and we bomb a building, but oh crap, we bombed a school, okay? Now, I don't know how you are, but I as a human, if you killed my children, I might hate you. And I might be so compelled to hate you that I go and become a terrorist. It is my opinion, and the opinion of many people in the defense and intelligence community and essays that I've read, that there's a CIA term, they call it blowback. It is the unintended consequences of actions you have that Americans aren't familiar with. See, we didn't have a context for why terrorists attacked us on 9/11. We don't understand that the CIA and our U.S. military conducts covert operations that often result in people dying that were innocent and had absolutely nothing to do with any conflict. And what happens is when you kill people's children, they get upset. And when they get upset, they might want to kill you. I believe that we make more terrorists by going to war and killing people than if we just stayed at home and minded our own business. Because if you want to win the hearts and minds of people in radical Islamic states, the solution isn't to fly drones over their homes and bomb them. The solution is to give them things that they need. Water filtration, fresh food, education, build schools. You know, for every school we blow up, we could be building a school, but we can't. You know, the smart weapons we use, the laser-guided bombs, they cost millions of dollars each. They each cost millions of dollars. So I guarantee you, if instead of blowing up schools and blowing up hospitals, we were building schools and hospitals with that same money, we would endear ourselves to many more people who would be less likely to radicalize themselves and later go and be part of organizations like ISIS. Like, that's the thing. When we talk about why ISIS happened, well, I've read a ton of essays on it recently. It's because we destabilized a sovereign country in Iraq. Saddam Hussein might have been an asshole, but he was an asshole that wasn't ISIS. So let's put it all in perspective what we're doing. That's one of the reasons Bernie Sanders' ideas aren't radical. They're just different than what we've been doing. They're different than the status quo that many Americans are used to. Remember, Hillary Clinton was in support of these foreign wars. She voted for them. She is part of the problem. When you look at Republicans and Democrats and you look at their voting record, you'll find that often they vote similarly on many of the same issues. It's because we have two parties, but the fallacy is that we actually have two parties. We have two parties that vote on things that they both agree to vote on. Bernie Sanders, as a senator, can only vote on what's in front of him. However, as a presidential candidate and as a future president, Bernie Sanders can be given a mandate to create new policy that is so far away from what we're used to that we can actually create real change. It's a big idea. That's why I like Bernie Sanders, because he's talking about redistributing wealth and spending money on education and making college more affordable and spending money inside the United States and ending tax loopholes for big corporations. He's talking about ideas that are so big and so challenging to so many career politicians that they're scared. And when that's the thing that is so endearing to me about Bernie, is that he has scared people. When you see the rhetoric that's being leveled against him and the terms, whenever you see like just terms being thrown at someone, they call him a socialist. You know, whenever people resort to name calling, it means they're out of ideas. It means they're out of original things to say. So all they can do is attack you as a person. They can't attack his policy. Because Bernie, when he does debate people on policy and explain his positions, they seem highly logical and forthright and interesting and compelling. Yet when other politicians challenge him, especially when they start, lobbing things at him on Twitter, and his opponents lob things at him on Twitter, it sounds crazy. But I believe in the America that Bernie Sanders wants to have. I believe in an America where we're getting more liberal and we're getting more progressive and we're becoming more European, which isn't really a bad thing. When you look at what we need to do as a country, well, Bernie Sanders is trying to make those hard decisions, and I think he's in a unique position because he's old. He's 72, 73 years old? He's almost done with his career in politics. At this point in time, he can be done with it. The other thing I like about Bernie Sanders, you actually look at his voting record and his voting history, he is pretty consistent on what he's been saying. He's been talking about wealth redistribution since the late 1980s. He hasn't changed his position. He's always had these ideas. But he's finally said, you know what, I'm running for president. I'm on my way out anyway. Let me go out with a bang. And I think that's important. Now, here's what's important, really, really, really important to remember about Bernie Sanders. He has the ability. Yeah, he was pro-gay rights, and well, I don't think anybody's pro-abortion. I think we're pro-choice. I'm not over here like, we just need to abort more babies. Like it's a choice, so nobody's really pro-abortion. Let's just get that straight. Although technically I guess I am pro-abortion, but only if you're stupid. Yeah, I'm only pro-abortion if you're a fundamentalist Christian. And then please don't raise children. Please get an abortion if you intend to raise children in a homophobic, moderately racist, crazy environment. Anyway, Bernie Sanders can, and he has the ability to split a Democratic vote, which I think to many Democrats is a scary proposition, because the only dangerous thing that could happen in this election is somebody in the Republican Party winning the election. Unfortunately, and I hate to speak out against a lot of these Republican ideas. I feel like the Republican candidates that are in front of us have the wrong ideas. They don't believe in climate change. They don't believe in equality for gay people and transgender people. They don't believe that the rich are too rich. They don't believe that we're too invested in foreign oil. They want to spend more money in domestic oil production and natural gas and things that are bad ideas. That's what bothers me so much about the Republican Party. It's not that they're bad people. It's that their policy is antithetical to the direction that the country needs to go. We don't need to pursue a line of policy that puts us more in the hands of fossil fuel companies and big corporations and powerful banks. Those problems are only going to get worse the longer we continue those ideas. It's not like climate change is going to end if we just ignore it and continue our bad policy decisions. Like I've said for years and years, nuclear energy is probably the best way to go for the United States. It's just going to be that way. But we don't have any candidate other than Bernie Sanders, who has long been a proponent of nuclear energy, who wants to change U.S. nuclear policy. And I think that in and of itself is probably the most important, at least energy policy idea that we can talk about. Because we can talk about renewables, we can talk about solar and wind, but the only actual viable adult solution to solving our energy crisis, because make no mistake about it, as long as we are tied to the Middle East and their oil production for our internal logistics needs, we are at a deficit and our economy is in danger. I don't know, most of you aren't old enough to remember this happening, but there was a time when there was an OPEC, when the OPEC embargo happened and we didn't have enough gasoline in the United States and our economy ground to a halt. Remember, the OPEC nations have the ability to, at any point in time, choke out the American economy, because everything that travels in the United States travels on big rigs, and those big rigs need diesel fuel. And if we don't have enough of it, we can't produce enough domestically. I think that is a national security issue, because if our economy can at any point in time be shut off by people who are crazy and ideological and sometimes theocratic, because make no mistake about it, Saudi Arabia is a theocracy. They are run by they're an Islamic state run by kings and queens. It's fucking nuts. And so if any reason they should become angry with us, well, then we have issues. So I want to make sure that we understand that what Bernie Sanders is proposing when it comes to national energy policy is rational and reasonable. It's rational and reasonable to say we need to make ourselves as self-sufficient as we can. Being self-sufficient in your energy production is a core national security issue. We don't want other countries being able to leverage our entire logistics infrastructure and our entire travel infrastructure because we made bad policy decisions, or worse yet, the prices are going up, or China and India come online as economies. Because this is another thing we have to consider about how we've been pursuing our policy towards national infrastructure and logistics. The single biggest job in the United States that employs more people than anything else is truck driver. That should tell you that there's a lot of people going on the roads back and forth, transporting goods to and from places. Now, as China and India grow and more people in those developed economies purchase automobiles, our competition for who's purchasing gasoline is going to increase. Now, the supply isn't going to change. We're not magically going to be able to get more oil out of the ground. So, as China and India economically develop and have a growing middle class, as they do, they're going to be able to purchase more oil. Right now, GM sells more cars in China than they sell in the United States. That's a fact, and it probably should scare the shit out of you. China is the largest growing auto market, followed secondly by India. And what that means is those cars are fueled by gasoline and diesel fuel, and that means there's more competition for gasoline. And if gasoline gets more expensive in the United States, you've seen it happen. The cost of goods goes up. And when the cost of goods goes up in the United States because of logistics costs being increased, that disproportionately impacts the poor and middle class. Because to a rich person, if you make $150,000 a year, you don't care that the cost of a loaf of bread went from $4 to $6. But to a person who makes less money, that only makes, say, $8 or $9 an hour, the cost of basic goods and services going up even incrementally is hugely impactful. That's why it's necessary that we, as Bernie Sanders has been saying, shift our our foreign energy policy away from purchasing energy overseas towards making ourselves more self-sustainable by pursuing energy solutions here in the United States that allow us to produce our own energy. And those energy solutions largely will not involve fossil fuel because, one, we just don't have the deposits. Two, it's not a good idea. It's not a good idea to pursue an energy policy that ejects CO2 into the atmosphere and exacerbates our problem of climate change. That's an issue. Bernie Sanders is saying these things, and he's being dismissed as a radical. But I want to say that those ideas aren't radical. It's not radical to say, I want my car to run on energy that came from the United States. That's not a big deal. Tesla is proving it right now that we can have cars that run on battery power. And all we need to do then is change a little bit of our infrastructure. If a gas station became a charging station or a battery swapping station, the infrastructure's there. In Germany, they had this really cool idea where they said, well, we don't have the ability to charge our cars. Where are we going to charge our cars? Well, in Germany, they're saying we have street lights everywhere. We already have an infrastructure grid that serves electricity all over the place. And it's high power. Why don't we just tap into our existing light grid? Germany is proving the solutions we need are right in front of us. We just have to make a couple of decisions to change what we're doing. Now, if Bernie Sanders gets that mandate, what does that really mean? Well, it means that moving into the future, we're going to be able to have more candidates like Bernie Sanders that can go in and shape things for us. So we can have the things like affordable college. Bernie Sanders wants college education, public college education, to be free. And that might be a terrifying idea to people, but I think it's a brilliant idea. I think that if you meet a certain criteria, if you show the aptitude and you've got the grades and you can test into it, then yes, you should be able to go to college for free. Because not everyone has the means to go to school. A lot of people come from poor families where they can't afford to go to college. Yeah, they might have qualified for student loans and grants, but their college experience is going to be much different than someone from a middle class or an upper middle class background whose parents have the ability to fund their housing, make things easier on them, and have a higher graduation rate. If you can graduate college, it's better than going to college. I think we can agree upon that. So when Bernie Sanders says, I want to make college free, that's not a crazy idea. An educated workforce is a better workforce. Because this is the thing I want to tell you guys about education and how education is the most important thing we can have in our workforce. Our workforce is stronger when we're more educated, because we hear about these things called jobs going overseas. Jobs are going overseas. Why are jobs going overseas? Because they're taking our unskilled, uneducated labor market away. We can't compete in unskilled, uneducated labor. We just can't. There are people who will do it in Southeast Asia and Micronesia and India and China for less money because they have less living expenses than we do. Fewer living expenses than we do. And they don't demand the same standard of living, which is fine. They're developing nations. They're not going to demand the same standard of living. But that's fine. That is fine. And I'd say this because here in the United States, we have a better education infrastructure than they do anywhere else in the entire world. People come to the United States the world over to get world-class educations that our citizens miss out on. And I think that's wrong because you know what? We shouldn't be taking the low-paying jobs. Here in the United States, we should be the ones that have the high-paying jobs that demanded a high education. We should be producing the high-technology goods that we export to other countries that we then benefit from. Or rather than having a trade deficit, we'll have a trade surplus with many nations because we're the dealers of high technology. The best goods, the best finished goods, the best ideas. That should be our push as a nation. So when Bernie Sanders says we need free education, what he's really saying is we need a more educated workforce because a more educated workforce is more valuable. Is that a radical idea? I don't think so. Now, what happens when we develop all these big new technologies? Well, the world is growing. And if you take a bigger world view, All right, if you think a little bit bigger, if you think outside the box, right, you're going to understand that developing third world nations, soon they're going to want the things that we want. And we should develop, we here in the United States should be developing the carbon neutral energy economy that we can then export to other countries. Because we've always talked about exporting capitalism, which I think is an idea which is good, but most countries already adhere to the idea of capitalism, save for a few. Hi, North Korea. What we really need to do is show them we can export energy. Because really, when you think about it, our best currency, the only true currency in the world that has real value is energy. Energy is work. Work that can be done for you in the form of energy. And I think that if the United States pursues a clean energy economy, where we are the ones who get behind molten salt reactors, small modular nuclear reactors, and we begin exporting that technology overseas, the developing third world. See, this is something we don't think about. Down in Central America, countries in Southeast Asia, one of their biggest deficits right now is energy. They don't have the coal. They don't have the hydropower. They don't have the nuclear energy. They don't have the things we have. The reason that they have failed to develop for so long is they don't have enough energy. They don't have enough clean water. The cool thing is, and this is something I read about the other day, clean water and energy are your two huge, like if you have clean water and you have energy in a country, you can do a whole lot. You can get a lot done, and you can grow the world economy. Because this is another idea we hear is, that we need to use less energy. That people talk about, we need to use energy efficient light bulbs and all that. Yes, it's good to be energy efficient, but through the course of humanity, we have only ever used more energy. And as third world countries come online and they start using more energy, we need to be able to give them the energy that they need. And the only way that we know how to do that currently, that we can actually export, that might be workable, will probably be through small modular molten salt nuclear reactors that are completely safe, by the way. Look these up. And they're being pushed currently right now by many energy companies and small nuclear facilities throughout the United States. And they're being researched, and it's important we do this. But as the third world comes online, you can use these reactors to desalinate seawater to give people fresh water. You can use it to power factories so they can go to work. Because it's not for lack of work that these people don't have the ability to interact in the economy. A lot of times they don't have the energy necessary, the electrical power to do these things. And I know this is going to sound unfamiliar to many of you, but there are some countries throughout the world where electric power and energy is only available for part of the day. Now, we have energy 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in most developed OECD nations. But to think about not having electricity through parts of a day, that would cripple the American economy, just as it currently cripples economies in third world countries. That's a big deal. But imagine the United States had the ability to export energy. When you look at the wealthiest nations in the world right now per capita, what do? They have a net surplus of exported energy. When you look at the OPEC nations that export oil, that's a net surplus of exported energy. When you look at Gazprom and Russia, and you look at the oligarchy there, what is their net export? Well, is it natural gas and oil? Yes, their net export is energy. And for the United States to be successful in the global economy in the future moving forward, we won't be able to rely upon our natural resources of coal as a global export. But what we can do is rely upon our technology as a global export of energy. If we become an exporter of energy in the form of nuclear fuel and nuclear reactors, then we become the country that is really in charge of the global economy again. And until that happens, we will be at a deficit to countries like Russia and in the Middle East, the entirety of the OPEC nations. That is something that I think we should pursue. And Bernie Sanders has talked about these ideas, and people have laughed him off as a crazy old Jewish quack. But once again, you're not crazy if you want to be self-reliant. I think that one of the most American ideas is to be self-reliant, to be self-sustaining. I'm going to do it myself. I'm an American. It's that the self-exception, the self-individualism, the thing that I'm going to do this by myself and I'm going to lift myself up by myself. What's more an American idea than that? That we can be ourselves, and not only can we be ourselves, we can really give that American way of life to other countries. When we talk about invading foreign nations and bringing them into the American way of life, the American way of life I'd want to see is a carbon neutral, peaceful way of life, where we have cheap, abundant energy, where jobs are plentiful, where technology is high tech, where we don't judge people based upon their sexuality, where men and women are equal. When we talk about exporting an American lifestyle, isn't that lifestyle the one that we want to be exporting, not the export of military and global foreign oil dependence? Like, that to me isn't American. The ideas that the Republican Party has been running on for so long are antithetical to what I believe are American freedoms. You don't truly have freedom if you're being chained to a country that's 10,000 miles away that you're dependent upon for your car to get from point A to point B. That's not freedom. Like, that's the antithesis of freedom. I'm being enslaved by a country because my car will only run on their oil. I can't get that here. That's not freedom. So why is it that American politicians, predominantly Republican politicians, want to subsidize foreign oil companies? Because of money. And money has made them evil. And money has made their decision-making process poor. And that's something that Bernie wants to end. When we talk about the dissolution of super PACs and Citizens United, that's a great idea. And Republicans are terrified of it because it would change campaign finance funding, and it would be much harder for them to get money from wealthy billionaires to run their campaigns and spin these propaganda machines that tell American citizens the things that aren't true. You know, when people say Bernie Sanders, he wants to completely change the way the American political system works, he's crazy. Is it wrong to want to change the way a broken system works? You know, if my lawnmower is broken, I'd take it apart and figure out what was wrong with it. Why is it wrong for Bernie Sanders to ask questions about what's wrong with the American political system? Take all your problems, break them apart. Jack White, what was that song? It was, what was it, Elefunk? Is that the album? Take all your problems, rip them apart. But anyway, Jack White, it was the White Stripes. Somebody looked that song up. But anyway, break down your problems, figure out where the problems are, take out the broken parts and put it back together. I'm not proposing, buy Bernie's merch, you guys. His campaign is funded entirely off donation. This is true. Bernie Sanders is also practicing exactly what he preaches. You know, he has raised a fraction of the money Hillary Clinton has. In fact, he's a distant second right now to Hillary Clinton. He is at a deficit by playing by his own rules. And I would say that, yeah, it's a good thing that he's playing by his own rules. It's good to show that he's at a deficit because he's trying to do the right thing and only take contributions from individual donors and not taking money from huge corporations. I think that the fact that he's doing that is exceptional. Why is it a bad thing that he's playing by his own rules? I don't think so. I think the fact that Hillary's playing by the rules at hand are okay, but I'm not going to vote for her. Now, the dangerous part with Bernie is maybe he splits the vote and all of a sudden a Republican's destined to win because, you know, 50% vote for a Republican and 25% vote for Bernie and 25% vote for Hillary. It would be crazy to see an independent gain that kind of traction because, remember, Bernie's ideas are going to scare the shit out of many of the more fundamentalist, conservatively minded people in the United States that don't understand that we need to change, that don't understand that these things need to happen. And that's fine. But this, to me, it might be, and as crazy as it sounds, it might be more important to lose and show that we have the people in this country than it is to win and win on Hillary's terms, because I don't want the same thing we have. There's nothing wrong with President Obama's policies, and I'm happy that he's done some of the things he's done. But I think that the change that I was asking for in 2008 didn't happen. Yeah. And so why do I support Bernie Sanders? Because I want something so sweeping and so radical and so crazy, quote unquote crazy, that I just don't see any other politician on the landscape that's willing to do the things that I think are the hardest things. Because the hardest thing it is to do is to admit you have a problem and change. You know, right now, America, the way I see us, we're kind of like a drug addict or an alcoholic. You know, we make all these decisions that we say are good, but we make them because we're addicted to oil. We're addicted to foreign money. We're addicted to campaign donations from giant corporations. We're making decisions in the short term that seem like a good idea, but that are going to negatively impact us in the long term. And so I am criticizing America from a place of love. I'm saying, hey, yes, we have problems. We need to address these problems. It's not wrong to say everything is wrong. We've been pursuing the wrong things for a very long time, and we need to change. If you treat America like an addict and say, I love my America, but we've been doing the wrong thing, then you'll make the right decisions. But as long as you live in denial of the problems, then you're going to keep repeating that vicious cycle, that horrible cycle. Because when you consider us like an addict, see, this is the difference between the way I think and the way the Republicans think. It's like a who loves mommy more hugging contest, right? Let's say your mom's a vicious alcoholic, okay? You can go and defend mom and you can say, you don't love mommy, you're being mean to her, you're telling mommy to change, I'm going to go hug mommy and tell mommy how much okay, that's the way a child would behave. You know, I'm looking at my country like a parent with an addiction. I'm saying I love my parent. I know that historically my parent's been much better, but I would like my parent to change because I know that my parent has a problem. And I would rather say, you know what, I love you. I would rather address your problems. Let's talk about this. Wait, who am I for? I don't know that you looked at the title of this before you clicked on it. I'm endorsing Bernie Sanders. I'm endorsing Bernie Sanders because I think he's a better option than Hillary Clinton. And when you look at who's leading the polls for Republicans right now, it's Donald Trump. What do I think about Bernie's idea to raise the minimum wage to $15? I think it's 100% correct, and anyone who says it's impractical hasn't studied the same economic essays and research that I've looked at. If we were to raise the minimum wage, nothing bad would happen at all. The only people, remember, throughout the course of history, even through the industrial era, right, when we were rapidly industrializing back in the early 1900s, people were saying that if you pay workers more, it's going to cripple the economy and slow growth. The inverse is actually true. When you pay people more, they are able to contribute and participate in the economy. When you pay someone a living wage, they are paying their way back and they spend more money on goods and services. It's okay to tax the wealthy and then give that money back in because a healthy, vibrant economy has more people participating in it. A wealthy person with $10 million can only really drive one car at a time. They can only live in one house at a time. They can't spend all the money and the wealth they accrue. There's a guy, I forget his name. He was one of the, I think he was one of the lead investors in Amazon. He was in he was one of the voices in this movie, Inequality for All. But he basically talked about how wealthy people can't really fundamentally spend more money than they can on one person. Yeah, they can collect cars, but they can't really spend the way they need to. A person is bad at spending enough money on themselves. I know it sounds crazy because you see these people on Instagram accounts and they have Ferraris or whatever. And I know it sounds crazy to say a Ferrari doesn't cost that much money, but it doesn't. I mean, when you look at the grand scheme of things, the Ferraris and the houses and all that, typically they acquire wealth. They have houses they don't live in. And that kind of surplus, ridiculous, gross wealth needs to stop. There's nothing wrong with saying you don't need 10 fucking mansions. That's not a crazy idea. I am perfectly happy with my nice, modest home with good furniture in it. I make a good amount of money every year, but I don't need mansions. I would rather, in my opinion, live comfortably and then any excess money I have go towards people who maybe didn't have parents that were able to help them get through school and get an education. I would rather make other people competitive in my economy. So when I say I want people to get paid $15 an hour, these people are able to more easily pay their rent. They're able to then go out and buy things. They can buy flowers for grandma on Valentine's Day or whatever it is. They can go out and they can buy the people. You have to remember, the more people you have actively participating in an economy, the more healthy your economy is. Because money's being spent internally, mostly middle class. That's a healthy economy. Capitalism needs to exist that way. It is the healthiest form of capitalism. You know, in nature, we call it biodiversity, right? Biodiversity in nature, when you look at any ecosystem, right? When you look at the rainforests, the healthiest rainforests are the ones with the most animals doing different stuff because they all work in symbiosis with each other. The most dangerous kind of biology you have is when you only have a few species in one environment. They call it monoculture. You know, and it's dangerous because the less diversity you have, the less healthy the ecosystem is. And I believe that the less people we have spending in our economy, the less healthy our economy is. Economies aren't isolated ideas where pay is different and separated than spending. These are fluid ideas. These are fluid principles that change and they have elasticity and they move and they evolve. As our economy evolves more towards a robotic economy, and this is the thing, there are going to be fewer jobs moving forward. As computers become more high-tech, as more labor jobs are overtaken by computers, as things like, I saw this thing the other day, there's a machine now, a whole machine that makes hamburgers. Makes hamburgers, splits the bun, puts everything on top, does the whole thing. The company that invented it, I think they're out in California, they said, we're not making this to make your workers more efficient. We're making this machine to get rid of your workers. So when we talk about that, right, there will come a time where we have fewer and fewer and fewer jobs as computers and more robots take over the jobs that we do have. So it is important that we pay the workers we do have what they're worth. And they're worth a whole lot more than whatever the hell it is an hour. And it's not wrong to say that people deserve to be paid for their hard work. The people who have a vested interest in saying that people shouldn't be paid are the same people who probably have 10 mansions. That's not a crazy idea. When you make more... I guarantee you, we raise the minimum wage to $15, nothing bad will happen. In fact, the economy will probably grow for it. I'll sign my name to it. I know it'll work because it works. It's proven. Anytime you raise the minimum wage, you get more people. The idea that there's these libertarian ideas that, that you're only going to spend a certain amount of dollars and we'll only get people working part-time. That actually doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. When you raise the minimum wage, when you look at every state that's raised the minimum wage, what happens? The middle class grows, businesses don't lay people off, and what happens is when more businesses have more money to spend, they spend with each other. There are more people interacting in business. It's this thing they call the broken window fallacy. If you break a window, then people will fix it. Well, you know what? Why the fuck are we going around breaking windows? Don't break windows and we won't have to fix them. Like, that's the libertarian ideas of economics where we need to let the free market decide are fucking ridiculous. Libertarian economic ideas are for economic toddlers who don't understand how real economies work. And so when we have Republicans and neo-libertarians, and I call them libtards, no offense to retarded people, you're not as dumb as libertarians. The thing is we're getting away from, minimum wage was created so people could live off a wage no matter their job. Exactly. But I think that we need to evolve that idea to say that, you know what? People deserve to have a certain basic needs met. And I believe when you look at our housing market, when you give people the ability to make enough money to increase their station in life, that's actually what matters. Because the problem with the minimum wage that slots you below the poverty line is that it creates a cycle where it's almost impossible for you to get out. You can't get to that next station in life. It's not the fact that I want people to make $15 an hour. That's not the important part. The important part to remember is that it's a graduated process. We want people to make $30 and $40 an hour. I'm glad to say that the difference between me being 18 and 28 has been a huge bump in pay. I mean, depending on how my day breaks down, I'll make somewhere between $100 and $150 an hour every single day. And I'm fine with that. And in fact, I'm fine with it. If somebody told me today, Shane, I want to tax you, it's 60% of your income, I'd be fine with that because I can still comfortably live. If I make $50 an hour, I'm still making what? $350 a day? That's more than enough to live on. I'll pay mortgage, car payment, all the groceries I want, vacations, all kinds of fun shit. If you honestly say you can't live off $100,000 a year, you're lying to yourself. You want more. You're excessive. I mean, if I'm calling you excessive and I have gold teeth, you're an asshole. Like, I want to put that in the most straightforward way possible. I have 18 karat gold teeth. And if I'm saying you're excessive, holy shit, you're excessive. Yeah, I mean, there's got to be some realism here. Like, let's, yeah. Your mom works minimum wage. It's impossible to get out of minimum wage. It's a deadly cycle because if you're making minimum wage, you don't have the ability to take time off to go to school at night. You don't have the ability to do those things. And that's the problem. I don't want to have this self-perpetuating cycle of poverty in America. Poverty breeds more poverty. Poverty breeds crime. Poverty breeds extra kids. When you're poor, you're less likely to be educated, which means you're probably going to have more kids than you can afford. I'm tired of people having cyclical poverty in their lives, which also disproportionately affects minorities currently. This sort of cyclical poverty and predatory way of thinking about how we treat human beings needs to end. It's the wrong way to do things. And once again, these ideas that Bernie's talking about, they're not crazy. It's not wrong to say, I just care about human beings because they're human. That's the right thing to say, honestly. To say, oh man, why should this person deserve to have a college education and earn their way up in life? Oh, because I believe human beings deserve to live a better life. Is that crazy? Is that a crazy idea? I don't think so. Why? When did it become a radical idea to want people to be able to be healthy and not sick? I don't know why that's a crazy idea. I've been told a couple times recently that I'm nuts for wanting people to have universal single-payer health care when they don't have to worry about their health care costs. They don't have to worry about getting cancer. Because here's the deal. You can get sick. Anybody can get cancer. Anybody can have some crazy accident happen to them. Anyone. And it's not crazy to think that could happen to you. It isn't. Like, we're all here. We're all in this together. When we isolate each other and pretend that we're all these little people that just don't interact with each other in an economy, we're being ridiculous. I interact with people who are middle class as much as rich or poor people in any economic thing every day. You know, later I'm probably going to get food ordered to me, and the guy who's going to deliver it is probably going to make less than minimum wage. I don't know why that guy, for his work, should be paid so much less than I do. He's working, he's driving around, he's delivering hot food. That's a job that I don't want to do. Is it necessarily as skilled as my job? No. But it doesn't mean that I think he deserves just a crazy disproportionate less money than I do to live my life. He's not less human than me. So let's think about this idea and what it really means to interact with people and treat humans like humans. The socialist ideas, are they bad? Is it bad to have a few socialist ideas and introduce some socialist principles into an economy that's largely capitalist? No, of course not. It adds some balance. There's nothing wrong with balance. Right, Fox News? Fair and balanced? Right, anyway. Talk for a little while. It's almost 1 o'clock. I want to probably get some I want to get a banana in me. Take that how you will. And I'm going to go work out. So anyway, it's been real talking to you guys. I hope you all learned something, and it's going to be a long replay, so I hope some of you made it to the end of the replay.